Okay. Is anyone in here? Do we have sound this time? Do we have sound this time? We can hear. Excellent. Excellent. I'm glad that worked on the settings. Okay. It's a real hodgepodge kind of show today, but it's number one, it's overdue. I feel like it's been what's up, Nick? What's up, Emperor Lightyear? I'm trying out this like interest. If you see me like squinting in, I'm trying out this new want this to look like a real show, like sitting behind a real desk. As you can see, I brought out the restoration hardware furniture for the first episode at the house. But so yeah, I'm gonna have to zoom in with my eyes to read some of the text, but I like what we got going on here. But yeah, real hodgepodge of a show here. It's overdue. It's been a while. I think the reason that I don't like actually just ride off into the sunset is because I do love the intellectual pursuit of this kind of stuff. And absent this kind of stuff, you can just start to like rot upstairs a little bit, And you see this in the stories of like the people who like win the lottery or something like that. And like overnight, a massive, like unexpected life-changing outcome. There's oddly, I guess you'd think counterintuitively, a lot of like stories of depression in there because they kind of lose, the sense of purpose that they had. But let's go ahead and get the show started. Let's we're gonna have to be going through our notes and kind of talking about some of the things that I've been thinking about for weeks now. Both a message that I think has to be said. Sorry. Actually, there's nothing to be sorry about because I'm not, let's say this as a disclaimer number one, I'm not the bad guy for just telling the news or just sharing the observations of what has happened. The bad thing is the things that I'm going to talk about, the things that actually did happen. So it's kind of a don't shoot the messenger as a disclaimer number one. Disclaimer number two, not only am I imperfect, I'm deeply flawed. So some of the gossipy type things, are coming from a place of like, I have regrets. I wish I would have done a couple things differently. But I think just the net outcome was that I was just like really done wrong in a lot of this kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, the 48 laws of power in podcasting. We're going to talk about MSTR. I'm going to kind of, start at like the foundational level of what I see as, to me, just the most compelling, long-term store of value asset that I can find on the market. So I'm going to lay out like kind of like the base case from the foundational level and kind of work my way up. We're going to talk about some of the FUD pieces and kind of the circular or cyclical nature of these things. One day like proof of reserves is an issue. The next day, like no one talks about it. So there is kind of like a hot button issue of the day. So we'll talk about that. But yeah, again, sorry folks. Wish I had the capacity, bandwidth, whatever you want to call it, to do this kind of stuff more often. It's very much a one-man show. One man plus one young lady on four legs with a lot of hair. But yeah, there's just a lot of things going on. So speaking of, had a big move that's, going to be continuing on for weeks. I have a new addition to my immediate family. And I think that this is such an important acquisition or growth in my family that I created my own KPI for this, my own, key performance indicator for this. I call it the family growth yield. So far for this year, I got 100% family growth yield. It's just a percent change of the growth of one's family members. And so take that, you families of 10 who are only going to get 10% on your next person or animal that joins your family. I say all that to say, remember the Bitcoin yield argument as like a relative comparison tool? When it was like, oh, blockchain group, 1,000% Bitcoin yield, Metaplanet, 400 or 500% Bitcoin yield, smarter web, thousands percent Bitcoin yield. It's like, guys, this is base effect math like 101. This is like the most simple, what I would consider to be like intuitive idea out there, that like, guys, if the denominator is super small, or if the number that we're starting at is super small in relative terms to the comparison that everyone's comparing themselves against, strategy, then this isn't like a true like growth story. You know what I mean? What it is it's base effect math. The better application of that idea is, of course, something more like a Bitcoin force idea, where you combine the yield component, so like the change in speed and the change in mass. Or the way I was thinking about this at first is like force equals mass times acceleration. Mass is the total amount of like Bitcoin that the company has. Acceleration is their Bitcoin yield. So without one of those variables, it's really just like a nonsensical data point as a comparison tool. The other, necessary point of context there is that this KPI, like the KPI itself, is such a novel idea, and it wasn't introduced for the purposes of having like a comparison relative tool. It was, created for strategy to be able to show like, hey, this is kind of like our growth metric. This is how we like this really simple formula: change in number of Bitcoin divided by, change in shares outstanding, and then the change of that number over time. So that's really what it was. But it's just so funny how, like, during that kind of like mini blow off mania that we had, that I think peaked June 24th of this year, or like June 21st was when like the smarter webs of the world peaked. But everyone was just so clinging on to, Bitcoin yield. Climb, who I do like, I do like Climb. I think highly of him, but it was all like, it was all this like throwing shade at like, at strategy for, the outperformance in stock price, the bigger Bitcoin yield numbers and all this stuff. Meanwhile, BitStrategy was right the entire time. I did not think it would play out like this quickly, that, strategies MNAV, and I haven't looked at the numbers recently, I've been all over the place, but that strategies, MNAV can either be like break even the same as the smaller ones, or actually, have a higher MNAV than some of the smaller ones. Speaking of the smaller ones, Nakamoto, isn't that just a fun little experiment? It's like the Nakamoto thing is like a high school project that like nobody actually cares about, but like you have to like pretend to like take it seriously. So you'll market yourself as like, doing things. You'll market the project as like mattering, but like you like really don't care. And I mean, my gosh, that guy at the top has absolutely no business being there. He has no business running a used car parking lot. He also has no business running a parking lot where like you go to the beach, you pay a guy $10, you get to park there for the day. Inflation adjusted, it's probably like $20-$30 these days. But yeah, I mean, it's just an absolute clown show. And yeah, I mean, and we were saying this at, Bitcoin Vegas the whole time. Like the talk on the town was like, gosh, I wish we already had like an options market on on Naka, because I mean, look, shorting a stock is like the risk reward's just not there. Even though we could have made 80-90% from that point, closed it out recently, it's just not worth the risk reward. But if there was an options market, whew, man, that would have been an interesting outcome. Which this now leads me to what I believe is the most important issue, topic of conversation that has to be addressed. It's been addressed like somewhat, but I really do believe this is like the biggest issue in Bitcoin. It's not core versus knots. It's speaking of Bitcoin Vegas, that's what made me think of this. In that industry room for lunch sat these white boxes. I might give people PTSD from just like, talking about this issue, but in the industry pass room, there's these white boxes with sandwiches in them. And nothing is more disrespectful, condescending. There's no bigger slap in the face than giving people like a really bad wet gas station sandwich in like the Venetian. Where were we at? The the Venetian, I think it was Palazzo Venetian. Like we're in this like beautiful like works of art of facilities, and like again, like I'm not just saying this to like pin this on like David Bailey, but like this clown show. They serve to you in this white box this disgusting sandwich with like potato chips, and it's like people make a big deal about like the seed oils and stuff, which I agree with, by the way. But it's like we have like chips and cookies and like all this like crap. I really think that's the biggest issue in all of Bitcoin. I mean, like that is just such a condescending, disrespectful, act there. And yeah, so enough of that. Let's get into the gossip to the extent that people care about this stuff. For me, I think this is going to be like a one and done kind of like thing. Like, let's just put it out there. No need to keep like harping on it on a go forward basis. But like this deserves to be said. And yeah, so let's just get right into it. Let me try and explain this by like starting at the end and working my way backwards. This is all improv, by the way, like the structuring of the ideas. But the Ed Julien, Tim Kotzman conference the other week, whatever. That was right before I went to New Mexico to go get Vega, and I was like fully planning on going to that. I was going to be a speaker. I was going to, do all the right thing. I was planning on going, putting a good face out there, really looking forward to like seeing like friends and such friends. By the way, the only true, like 100% like truism on Wall Street that's always true: if you want loyalty, get a dog. That's the only like thing, the common phrases on Wall Street that's 100% true all the time. And maybe it's always been like this in like the white collar, like corporate, like, these Machiavellian types, and they're, a lot of them, not all of them, and I shouldn't have to name names here, but a lot of them are just dirtbags, just 100% out for themselves, like have no care in the world about loyalty, or it's just so low on the totem pole that it doesn't even like deserve a spot on the totem pole. And we get inundated with such wisdom. I mean that in a serious sense. It came off sarcastic, but from Warren Buffett, who will say things along the lines of, how did he say this? He's like, I would take my friendship and my relationship with Charlie over the $100 billion. And that's wisdom, right? Like that's you know, a lifetime of experience and understanding like what actually matters. But yeah, if you want loyalty, get a dog, because these industry folks, they know how to pretend. You know, that's a 50 Cent quote. But anyway, let's actually get into this. I'm starting to ramble. So yeah, I did not go to the Ed Julian, Tim Kotzman thing, because the day before, I wake up to, you know, True North has been sold to Asset, Strive, Vivek Ramaswamy, Matt Cole. And it's like, let's pause there. Let's just unpack that idea. True North started as Quant Bros, which was very clear on a number of things. Number one, we're going to try and have fun. Number two, we're not going to take ourselves too seriously. Number three, what was number three? We're not going to do the whole like and subscribe and like the whole cringe, like engagement, like farming grift. Number four, like we're going to have like drinks. We're going to like have fun. Number five, and this is really like the big one. We're legitimately, keyword legitimately, presenting ourselves as friends, having a conversation on like nuanced research, right? Like how many people, in anyone who's listening to this, how many people in real life, friends, family, neighbors, could you have like a full-on conversation about, you know, MSTR or Bitcoin or the Federal Reserve or interest rates, or, you know what I mean, any of these, you know, very relevant topics that we talk about? For me, it's like nobody, right? It's like not a single person. Like my dad will talk about oil, we'll talk about rates, a couple buddies will talk like a little bit of stocks, but it's really like nobody, you know what I mean, who really wants to talk about this stuff for hours. You know, people talk about it for a couple minutes, but then it's like, you know, pass the salt. I'm eating an omelet here and I want to focus on the omelet. I'm done with, you know, talking about like the Fed balance sheet. You know what I mean? I don't care. So with that being said, like you find someone on the internet who has such a like shared similar interest. It's like, great. We can like, we can fulfill that part of our lives. And maybe make a little show about it, because again, like you think like early Quant Bros time, like there was no like Bitcoin treasury like podcast. Like Tim Kotzman was not on the scene. Like there was no yeah, no, we're gonna get to the prep stand. We're gonna get there. Please allow me to have my moment of gossip. There were no other like podcasts like in this like Bitcoin like treasury company space. And you know, CNBC is like mostly trash in the sense of like it's just people who come on, they talk for 30 seconds, they'd be like, oh, Lululemon had like a 7% free cash flow yield last quarter, I like the stock, I'm gonna buy it. It's crap, right? There's no like actual like long form like unpacking an idea thoroughly, sharing a screen, creating your own like custom like metrics to measure and gauge the ideas that you're talking about, right? Like there was no, you know, higher learning, academic, like scientific, like problem solving here. Not problem solving, but there was no research process. I mean, so it's like, great, we'll fill that void. And it really was just like friends talking research with no like, you know, expectations. We didn't know if anyone was going to watch it, have any interest in it. I don't even know if how many people are like watching this. Like there was no expectations. It's like, let's just do this. We're going to have fun. And like, maybe something will come of it. Or like, if not, like we'll be fine. Like we'll just keep doing whatever. So it was like a low risk like bet. It was like a fun thing to do, and that's what it was. And that's why I'm saying it was just like friends talking research. So there's no product to be sold, right? Fast forward to the point in which I left True North. Jeff and I had a falling out. That's neither here nor there to like get into the particulars as to why. But immediately when he and I had that falling out, he changed the password to the Quant Bros YouTube channel and essentially like kicked me off it. Now I could see both sides of the argument to this, but let's also add the detail that after that, I still gave them the MSTR True North domain. No questions, not no questions asked, but didn't ask for money, didn't ask to be like cut in on anything. After Jeff had denied like the work that I put like 50-50 in with him, and honestly, that's very debatable. There was many long sleepless nights of me like editing the videos, doing this stuff, kind of like, you know, making the trains run on time while Jeff still had a job, and I was completely cut out of the channel because can't recreate the channel with the same name. It's already taken. Plus, I want to be able to post from the thing that I have like a body of work of posting from already. So he took that, completely booted me off it. Very, you know, cunning, Machiavellian. And then right around that time is when the show got to magically, the narrative just 180 changed into this is now investment grade, institutional grade, like research. So you built this audience, you built this momentum, you did this whole thing under the guise of it's just friends talking about research, meaning there is no product, there's nothing to be sold. It's just friends choosing to spend their time together. And I could run the tapes. I mean, all the receipts are out there. You can look even very shortly after I left. Jeff would, you know, one of his like openings for the show would be like, you know, hey, and by the way, like if you're new to the show, like what we're doing here is like we're friends and we'd be having these conversations anyway, like privately on a Zoom call, but we figured, you know, we'll just put it out there. Maybe someone else can like learn something from our like, you know, honest back and forth like discussion. And then magically that product gets sold for money. And I don't know if I didn't like read the articles, or I'm not like going through the like the line items of like balance sheets and cash flow statements of like asset, but I don't know if the dollar amount was disclosed, but there was not a fucking word from this guy like in advance to that, like, you know, hey man, this is the direction I want to go in, and I want you to like, you know, I bet you're gonna like disagree or like something, but I want you to be like compensated for like, you know, what you did to actually make like True North like a relevant thing. Because absent Quant Bros, there is no like initial audience, like, you know, fanfare of people looking for the folks who were like early on MicroStrategy. Like it was us. You know what I mean? It was us. We were the first to be like loud and proud and like talking about this. By the way, I remember in February of 23, just after, you know, FTX a couple months previously, February 23, that was when I like did my first MicroStrategy post. And I was almost like, it's like so silly to say this out loud now, but I was almost like nervous to like put that out there, because like even as recently as like, you know, Q1 of 2023, like it was so ideologically driven on Twitter that like you can only talk about Bitcoin, you can only talk about Bitcoin, you can only talk about Bitcoin. And I guess I like that subconsciously like impacted my like decisions. So like that's where we were just a handful of years ago. And guys like me and Jeff were the first ones to be like regularly like loud and proud, being like, I want to associate my name with MicroStrategy. This is my highest conviction bet for like X number of reasons. And I'm in this thing, baby. And I want to talk about it because I'm in this thing in size. So it ends up occupying most of your mind share, and then that's the thing that makes you want to talk about it. Hence why Quant Bros was started in the first place. You know what I mean? But for him to be calling me within like weeks, we had plans to go to some sauna or something the day before that Kotzman Julian event. And for him to be calling me, you know, as recently as of several weeks ago, to be like, "Hey man, the FUD's really bad on Twitter. Everyone's bearish. Blah blah blah. What's your take?" He's like looking for like bullish conviction in the stock. So I just find it so distasteful that Jeff has the audacity to still try and like extract like value out of me, knowingly, like while doing me wrong on the side. And this is the kind of guy he is. And you know, it's interesting. He didn't want me on the Quant Bros. Like he wanted to change the password so I could not have access to the Quant Bros YouTube channel, because like he didn't want it to come back to him or something. And look, I was in the wrong there. I was like drinking too much. So like there is something to be said about that. And that's where, you know, I have regrets, and I didn't do things right on my end either. But yeah, for him to not even have the decency to be like, "Hey, I want you to have X% of this sale because like you really helped." This just kind of shows you like what kind of corporate Machiavellian guy he is. Like he just read the 48 Laws of Power in a weekend and was like, "I need to put all of this into action right now." You know what I mean? I think it's Law 7, where it's like, you know, have others like do the work for you. He played that one to a T. I will give him credit for that. Not that any of this stuff is honorable, but he did do that one quite well. But I think he's very much overlooking the P.T. Barnum story, which I believe was in Law 2, where, you know, the more rogue, the more brash, the more brazen, the more kind of, you know, outside of the box guy was, you know, outperforming the well-respected institutional investor grade side of things in like theater, opera, you know, shows, things like that. And maybe he underestimated the P.T. Barnum story, but we'll see on a go forward basis, to the extent that I have an interest in doing this and like improving it and doing all of that. So yeah, that's kind of the gossip there. It just really bothered me to wake up that morning, you know, on the eve of the Kotzman Julian event and read that. You know, that just really fucking bothered me. And it's like, you know, I got a custom suit made for that event. Like I was like really looking forward to like my speaking engagement being in New York City. I was going to bring like, one of my buddies did end up going still, but I was going to bring like other people with me, try and like introduce them into the space. Cause, you know, a few of my friends have like, you know, over the past year or so, been watching a lot of Sailor videos, been, you know, wanting to learn more about Bitcoin and kind of, you know, do some of the things that I've been telling them about. So I was very much looking forward to it. But to think that all these fucking people who like you like think are friends, and honestly, some of them reached out, and some of them, you know, went out of their way to just reach out. And but to think that all of these other like fucking people would just like let that go on unchecked, not say anything, really like pick sides, pick the person who they think is gonna like benefit them more and like associating themselves with. And this is kind of like a broader, like not to beat up on any like True North like people or anything like that, but this is kind of just like what I fucking hate about and sorry for the language, I think it's distasteful too, but this is kind of just what I hate about like corporate white collar like jobs, right? It's either like a very fake, like, job that like doesn't matter in a corporate company that's been around for like 100 years. And it's like, everyone's just kind of like grifting off the system, or it's something more like a True North thing where it's like kind of like a quasi startup. It's like a quasi forming of relationships and people who want to like, move fast, do things like startup type culture. It gets way too Machiavellian, like, cunning, like people, not forming real relationships. Or like in the company that's been around for 100 years, it's just so fake and boring and like nobody actually cares. And like, you can just tell, that's why like both sides of like the corporate thing suck. And like, this is what bugs me the most about the True North thing, is that like, we had the opportunity to create something like so special. And, it's like Kevin O'Leary says, I want to drink like $1,000 bottle of wine because I'm just weeping at the opportunity lost. Where like, here's what should have happened, right? It's like True North should become the company. True North should be the company. Everyone can be the founder. We can make our own company, right? I don't shame anyone at all for like taking a job. But it's like, no, we should have been the job creators. We could then hire more people. We started out with like 10. In a year, it's 15. In a couple of years, it's 30, 50. Maybe we have 100 employees in like 5 years. And we have some type of like hedge fund, media, financial consulting, our own Bitcoin treasury company. Like there was so many. There was just so much like opportunity all over the place, right? And we could have actually maintained, which I would have much rather have done. We could have actually maintained like the voice of retail, right? Because since we're not looking for jobs, we are the boss. And we could have had, like, in the most optimistic sense, just to like prove the point, or not prove the point, but highlight the point I'm trying to make, is that we could have potentially had like a Joe Rogan type, process. I won't say Joe Rogan type outcome because that's, very optimistic, but we could have went on the Joe Rogan journey where it's like, keep a 100%, share of the message, who you bring on as guests, all of that kind of stuff, because we could have like so clearly, directly like competed with CNBC and Bloomberg. Like, I like Bloomberg a little bit better. I think it's a higher quality product than CNBC, even though I think CNBC is just more popular in terms of numbers, like viewership. But like, anyway, like that's like one of those, in addition to like hedge fund, Bitcoin treasury company, financial consulting, it's like we could have had like an everyday on like a stream. Not don't chase the dying linear TV. You got to have a Comcast or Verizon or something to do that. No, we'll just do a stream directly to the internet, directly to YouTube, X, Rumble, whatever. And it could be like an everyday thing, right? Like so we could have competed with hedge funds and crushed them. We could have competed with media and crushed them. We could have built like an actual like OG like powerhouse squad of like our own company, our own Bitcoin treasury company. And we could have like incorporated a couple of those things in this, not incorporated, that's not the right word, but we could have like combined a couple of those things where like the hedge fund is in the Bitcoin treasury company, right? And we also have a media arm. And I mean, it's just, that's the thing that bugs me the absolute most. Not the fact that I didn't get cut in on whatever Jeff's payout was. And maybe it was like no payout. I don't know. So I want to be clear on that. I don't know what the dollar amount was. I don't know if that was discussed. But that pales in comparison to just, I mean, I am just weeping at the opportunity lost that we collectively had to control our destiny and like actually work with friends all the time in like a high speed, high performing team. It would have been like a special forces team, right? They're like there's a reason that 10 to 12, guys, gals, that's the right number, right? Anything less, it's like not enough for like, to really move the needle. Anything more, it's too much. It's a bureaucracy, and it's, we could have had that like that 10, 12, person like starting team, and then saw where it went and like actually ran it like a business. So that's the big loss, and that's irreversible, right? I mean, most all of them went off, like took jobs. Big tip of the cap to Dan Hillary, by the way, in all seriousness. I mean, starting your own thing is like the coolest of the possible outcomes. That's just an opinion of mine. But big respect for Dan Hillary on that. But yeah, just as far as the group collective, that's what bugs me the most there. So all right, enough of that. I was gonna open the show with like, doing some bite work with Vega, but I had no idea how the sound was gonna go. Maybe we'll close the show with how I was gonna open the show. And forgive me, folks, this is like really hodgepodge together. Like I said, got the restoration hardware furniture out here. I'm gonna really try and get this better, both in terms of like my message and like the presentation. But let's get into old strategy here a little bit. So my, core foundational bottom up type view here is that I really do think strategy is the best business in the world, and I want to harp so hard on the word business there, because still to this day, it was worse in the past, but still to this day, there's so many misconceptions out there about what strategy even is. Like, so many people think of it as like a Bitcoin ETF still. Some people think of it as like a levered Bitcoin ETF, a closed-end fund, or all this other stuff, and it's fundamentally not true. I will say I understand that case, because if you look at things like MNAV, it's not where I think it should be in terms of being valued as a business. At the 5, 6, 7, 8 times price to earnings, if we're using Bitcoin dollar gain as the E in earnings, I think that number should be 30, 40, 50. And we'll get into that. Damn, I should have had the pen over here. Let me grab the pen real quick. We'll close the show the way we were gonna open it, babe. That routine we did earlier, we're gonna do it at the end. But we got to come back to the PE 30, 40, 50. So yeah, I'm at least empathetic in understanding why people would view it as such, because of how it's traded. But to me, at its core, that's not what it is. Like, it's a business, and strategy, we are in the business of selling, a premium version of a product that exists in the world's largest TAMs. And when I say the world's largest TAMs, of course, it means total addressable markets. But the markets that I'm specifically talking about are both global fixed income and global real estate, to the extent that the real estate is used as like a rental cash flow producing instrument, a contract, whatever you want to call it, because it essentially is, right? It's if someone buys a house, that's like them putting out the principal and then looking to collect like a yield on that over time. So I mean, a real estate for rental purposes, like, really is like almost like a worse version of a bond, because then you have to absorb like the physical domain risk. You have to absorb like the credit risk of like the borrower. being able to pay or not being able to pay. So, but anyway, I'm not just going to be critical of the asset class, but those are the two. When I say we're going after the biggest TAMs, it's global fixed income and global real estate to the extent that it's used as a rental. And I think it's going to take, time, or let me say, I see that people are perhaps bothered, I guess, that, the prefs haven't ramped up. We've used a little equity ATM along the way after they said they weren't going to use the equity ATM below 2.5 NAV. Allow me to say this. I think that the more unrealistic outcome would be for just instant vertical adoption of the MSTR, prefs, because Bitcoin has not, moved in that way in terms of adoption. I mean, it's slowly grinding more and more and more favorable, and I'm not talking about price here at all. I'm just talking about the respected powers that be and their kind of perception on Bitcoin. Like I said, it's grinding in the right direction, and I think that's only going to continue, especially politically. But it was not a vertical line up in terms of people being oh, okay, I understand this, and it's not a scam, and it's it's not just something that's used for criminals. It's no, it was those narratives repeatedly. People were laughing at it. So given that backdrop of the underlying commodity here, the underlying thing of value, for lack of a better phrase, or the collateral, we could say, given that backdrop of things not being immediately vertically successful, then why would this be immediately vertically successful in terms of user adoption? I think it's going to be a slow grind. I think it's going to be a lot of Saylor, a lot of Fong, a lot of Sharish, a lot of Andrew Kang, not just to name the top four. I think it's going to be a lot more people than just that, but I think it's going to be a lot of intentional education, let's say, whether it's Saylor going on CNBC, Saylor going to something like the H.C. Wainwright conference, or I know people are also trying to get on the phone with folks like Sharish and Fong, and throughout all of those conversations, from MicroStrategy management, both in person, private, both in person, public, both podcasts, it's all going to be a continued education on the prefs. And especially at the in-person events, we've all seen the rings of people that will form around Saylor, and everyone's going to want to have time with him. And guess what's going to be on the topic of discussion? Just when he was on CNBC last year at some point, towards the tail end of the convertible bond era, he was on CNBC, and he was I forget, Morgan or one of the folks asked him so is now a good time to buy Bitcoin? And Saylor goes, oh, I think it's a great time to buy our convertible bonds. Actually, I'd actually buy them myself. They've outperformed, on a blended basis, they've outperformed Bitcoin over the past, whatever period of time. And the predators of Twitter really, were highly bothered by that. How dare anyone say anything other than buy Bitcoin? Anyway, so yeah, I think it's going to be a long slog of continued education as to why these things have value. And also implicit in that idea is a lot of the education is going to come from the market too. I think looking at, any way we can try and gauge adoption and accumulation of these things, whether it's in volume, volatility, price variance, Implied volatility is probably not going to matter, but it's really going to be a volume thing over time to see like to what extent are these being adopted, and also how well can these things weather the storm. This is going to be the big education that comes to us from the market in whatever next downturn there is. I'm not predicting one, but I mean, it's just inevitable to me that like Bitcoin's going to get cut in half from here at some point. But it might go to 444,000 before getting cut in half. But like at some point that is going to happen. So it'll just be interesting to see how do the prefs perform in that drawdown environment. Like that, now that I'm thinking about this is actually really important. Like, how are the prefs going to perform in a drawdown of Bitcoin and strategy, let's say? Because it's like, are they going to perform as like the flight to safety that bonds can and typically almost always do perform in times of crisis, minus 2022, just a handful of years ago, when both stocks and bonds decreased simultaneously in a correlated fashion for about, the better part of 12 to 13 months. So yeah, how are the prefs going to perform in the drawdowns? I think that's going to be the most important like piece of education from the markets coming to us in terms of user adoption, because if these things can hang in there, it's not like we think Stretch is going to run away in price, but I mean, if these things can like hold their capital value, Stripe specifically, whatever new products may or may not come out, and keep paying their dividends. So this is where it gets back to like MSTR as a business, right? It's not just how's the market gonna take to them, the products themselves. Are they going to buy them? Are they going to sell them? Whatever. This is also where it gets back to strategy as a business. How efficiently and effectively can they service the dividends in a way that makes sense? Or let me take that back, in a way that makes the most sense. And that should not be confused with like whatever the talk of Twitter is, right? Like here's an important thing to be said. Regardless of how many followers someone has, if they say something that's wrong, just because they have a lot of followers and experience in this or that or whatever, does not make it right. There's a lot of examples from like many, many, many different people that I could like name on this, but all too often, like, you can just see on Twitter, like, someone will say something very controversial, very wrong, very like provoking, and a lot of people will just buy into like, oh, that's got to be right. Like, look at how many followers this person has. That's the problem with Twitter. Let's pivot there briefly, because I think this is important. Twitter is an absolute dump. Like, allow me to say that again. Twitter is an absolute dump of junk with like one or two diamonds like buried at the bottom. And over the past month or so, with like the move and then going to New Mexico for dog school, and then having her for a couple weeks now, and just like being so like on the go, actively doing something, and like not being on Twitter, checking asset prices like once at night before I go to bed. Just such a better lifestyle. I know it's easier said than done. Last year I had my struggles like actually getting off the site, which is why I went ahead and like, permanently deleted it, and then massively ended up, regretting that, because then like all my life's work was just, kind of gone. Not my life's work, but for that period of time was kind of gone. But yeah, no, like Twitter's a dump, and this has been such a like refreshing, like get off of Twitter. But here's the point about like Twitter and why it's a dump. It's this circular like bragging cycle. Here's one I will name. Here's one I will name by name, and I like this guy, Jeff Park. I mean, like, great guy, fun to be around. But Twitter is just like Jeff Park saying like reposting his own thing and being like, do you get it now? Do you see how smart I am? Generational wealth can be made by those who know what's coming. Do you get it now? Do you see how smart I am? It's that just like circular, like brat in your face, constantly bragging, constantly trying to like position themselves as like smart. That's like one type. Then there's the engagement grifter type. This is like Fred Krueger. This is like sitting in a space all day, saying nothing, but just like driving like more followers, driving more engagement. This is like Fred Krueger sending out like this one-liner, very controversial like thing. Like MSTR should do this. Like, it's just no substance. He doesn't believe any of this stuff. He's just like obviously just trying to drive the numbers. He doesn't care. He doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't care about this. By the way, Fred Krueger's the guy who, like, once he first hit the scene, he was giving away his like the money you get, like the revenue sharing from like ads. He was giving that away, and that was the thing. Every week, it's like, oh, end of the week, I got paid. That means you get paid. This guy did good like Bitcoin content. I'm gonna give him my money. Yeah, all that stuff stopped like real quick. He's a pure play engagement grifter who probably has tips on his page. That's something to like look out for. And all this stuff is like public record, but like Jeff Walton has like tips on. You can subscribe to him. He will cup his hands and you can put money in there. While he'll like screw over a friend who like did a bunch of work and like not compensate him anything. Still try and like use him, you know, for insights, for conviction. He's got tips on. So look, I mean, and it's like, hey, it's public information. Don't blame me for just, you know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. But these are the kind of people that like we're talking about here. You know, and then what else? You got the AI slop. You got people, you know, just typing in all caps, this AI slop, very, very esoteric, like Michael Saylor is a wizard, or like it's just such cheeseball crap. What else? You got the clicks, you got the people like, you know, trying to get invited onto Saylor's yacht. It's very cliquey. It's very high school. It's very popularity contest. And it's very corporate. You know, there's so much trash on Twitter. But then the diamond at the bottom is this guy. He's a PhD. He does this show with Giovanni, our power law friend. I think his name is Steven. His name is, it's like Money or Debt. Base money, money or debt. Or maybe I flipped the handle and his actual name. It's like the volcano picture. Anyway, very, very deeply fascinating gentleman. Like, who's not, you know, not trying to like take his podcast corporate, but like from like a physics, mathematics, he talks about things like dark matter and like things that happen in space. I can't even figure out what's going down here on Earth. And he's like, you know, talking about things like plasma and dark matter in space. I mean, it's just so fascinating. And it's like honest, genuine, and like pure. So that's the diamond. But then there's like 50 feet of crap above that, and 100 feet of crap below that, until you get to the next diamond in there. So Twitter's an absolute dump. There's really nothing to be gained by spending an extra minute on that site than to just scrape the headline of the day and just have a sense that you know what's going on. Maybe you'll see like a great like research post along the way that really opens up, you know, your mind and enhances your creativity and makes you challenge your own perceptions, right? Like that's like the beauty of Twitter. And I'm not going to reminisce and say like, oh, it used to be that. Because it's always been like a toxic dump, but like there's just enough like super high quality stuff out there to keep you on the site. So that's Twitter. But let's go back to the prefs here on the speed, on things such as that. You know, let's talk about stretch as the iPhone moment. I think I did a post about this. I'm not sure, but let's actually talk about Apple's iPhone moment. Apple Computer. Maybe you've heard of them. The iPhone moment wasn't that great of a moment. Like in the moment, the 6 months, 12 months after the iPhone moment wasn't great. And what I mean by that is in the demo itself, there was like multiple errors. And for anyone who's like followed the Apple story closely, on one of those documentaries, where they're talking about like, you know, Steve and how he would do the demo days and how big of a deal that was. The one Apple employee's like, yeah, we'd be like us employees, we'd have like a couple rows. And when Steve was talking about a feature that like we individually worked on, we'd, you know, take a drink from the flask and then pass it around because they were always so stressed that like their part of the demo wasn't going to work. And very few things seem to like infuriate Mr. Steve Jobs more than like the demo not being like crisp, smooth, and like and well done. He was a real craftsman there. But so yeah, iPhone 1 demo day had issues. Steve was visibly unhappy at several parts of the demo day. But here's the thing, let's pause there briefly. There wasn't a bunch of people on Twitter being like, Steve Jobs is an idiot and like he should do this. There wasn't an army of unpaid non-consultants, you know, just bashing him. There were people in the media bashing him, you know, every which way, but there wasn't this like relentless, like Twitter didn't exist then. There wasn't this like, you know, relentless online force of just like nonstop criticism. But now we live in a time that there is. So that's also something that should be kept in mind. So yeah, iPhone 1 demo day had hiccups. And then from that point on, there was still like very much a debate as to BlackBerry or iPhone. Many of us know the infamous, you know, Steve Ballmer quote, you know, saying that like, oh, business people, they're not gonna buy this. They want a hard-mounted keyboard. They want, you know, only half the thing to be a screen. You know, and by the way, that is what the customer data like feedback was at that point. And this was a Steve Jobs decision that was against the data, very much in disagreement with the data, but massively right. It was like, no, the whole thing's going to be the screen. And the keyboard has to be a soft screen keyboard on screen, because one day we're going to have like widgets and other like, you know, emojis. He didn't say the word emojis, but he said like smiley faces or something like that. That we're going to want to, you know, like we need software so that we can constantly change like what the but the character that they're selecting. Hence why the hard mounted keyboards didn't work. So there was that like controversy there, in the way that, you know, there's controversy now from like, let's call it like the Chanoses of the world, who, by the way, be good to Chanos. Chanos is a good man. Chanos is a very good man. But there's a lot of controversy and has been for years of people being like, this is a Ponzi. And then once we started the prefs, it's like, okay, now it's really a Ponzi because they're not going to be able to pay the dividends because like their cash flow just isn't there. And then again, remember iPhone 1, like it was this thicker, bulkier like thing. And what was the biggest like, advancement really for the iPhone, if we're excluding like the hardware like advances of like smaller batteries, more transistors on the chips and in the phone, better cameras, all that stuff, thinner. It was the App Store. The App Store is like really what allowed like the iPhone to flourish. And that was like years down the line, up at the point when Saylor did the Motley Fool interview. I believe that was 2012, 11, 12, somewhere right in there. Right where the iPhone 5 had come out. And he's like, there's not a 6-year-old on the planet who doesn't want an iPhone 5. Like that's how big of a deal this is. And that's when like the App Store was flourishing. That's when they had a major hardware change. The phone got way thinner. The battery life got way better. The camera got way better. The App Store, that's when like that's really when like the mobile wave thesis was like in like the rocket ship, like vertical phase where not all of, but many, many, many of the physical items of life actually did compress into the iPhone. And that's one of, from my perspective, one of the core ideas of the mobile wave, the book, is that, it was the dematerialization of goods, of the calendar, of the notepad, of the camera, of the camcorder, of the what else? The address book, the phone book, of the laptop, of all this stuff, right? Just compressed into one item, of physical keys, right? You could, as Saylor said, you could flip a key to your family members on software so that they can come into your house during these hours. And some people, it's a one-off key. Some people, it's like your spouse or your mom or someone who's going to be there all the time. It's a perpetual key. Like that's what he was talking about, was like the impact that software can have on the dematerialization of goods. So I say all of that to say that it took a number of years for Apple's iPhone moment to be an iPhone moment. And here's like the kind of obvious litmus test on that, is that no one was calling it an iPhone moment until like 10 years later or more. The first time I had ever heard the phrase iPhone moment was in like studying Tesla, where people would be like, the Model 3 is our iPhone moment, right? And that was in like 2017, 2018, like a clean decade. And it was probably said, before that, but that was a clean decade after, iPhone 1, which I believe was 2007. I forget which month, but I'm pretty certain iPhone 1 released in 2007, and people weren't even using the phrase until a decade later, and they were only using it in a comparative sense, in like a positive sense. But that was not the truth on the ground in the moment at the point in which the iPhone actually did launch. So I think we touched on a good bit there. I do want to open this up to questions, and so feel free to like throw questions in there. I can also scroll up. I just got to do a good old reach to get up there, but I can scroll up if there's questions in there already. Because I want this to be a bit more, dynamic. I want people to be able to call in, and then like I'm testing out like with the speaker. Maybe they call in here, it goes into the mic, and people just hear like an unplanned like phone call of like a debate where it'd be like someone saying like, the equity ATM is like bad or something like that. And then I'll get on and be like, well, no, it's actually a good thing because like we want to further widen our like monopoly moat of having like the most amount of Bitcoin relative to every other entity on earth, private or public. Because then it seems clear to me at that point that we'll always have the highest credit rating of any entity that is holding Bitcoin, thus making us the most desirable candidate from a customer perspective to actually be selling the preferred perpetual fixed income securities. So like that could be fun. We could like debate that back and forth. We got a question from JD. Using the original iPhone, back in the days, it was obvious they were miles ahead of BlackBerry. It was the number one player at the time. Look, that's fair. I think the software was very smooth. Like the first type of device I had on this was like the iPod Touch. That was the first type of these devices that I'd ever had, and I had never experienced software that was that smooth, where you could just swipe and it beautifully followed the finger. Whereas I had like an LG Voyager. That was like my last like non-iPhone phone. Like an LG Voyager. It had a touch screen, but it was terrible. It was never calibrated. It never worked. It sucked. So in that sense, I agree. But the BlackBerry like mafia and like the business, like the boring businessmen of the time, like they did love their BlackBerries. The dads at like soccer practice, they'd be like really like flexing these BlackBerries in a way that was kind of awkward. It's like it's like that epic Apple commercial where it's like the cool, like younger, like millennial type is like the Apple, and then like the old, like the boomer who's like boring and dull is like the Windows guy. Like that's the Windows machine. And it's just like it's such a fun jab at like Bill Gates and like his just his boomerish tendencies. But yeah, there was a big push for the BlackBerry back then. But yeah, no, I feel solid about that point that like Apple's iPhone moment was not an iPhone moment in real time. At the day of launch, 6 months out, 12 months out, because the App Store, I'm going off memory here, but the App Store was like a couple year development, and that's really what turn this thing into like a mega powerhouse where you could have, your mobile banking, you could have your email, you could have your social media, you could have the text, you could have all these things. You could even have like a different texting channel, like a Signal or something like that. The developer community seems to have thrived quite well, where folks were like essentially creating jobs for themselves by, writing software and putting it up on the store. Apple takes a pretty big tax though, 30%. But here's another idea about like strategy that like just came to mind too. It's like there really is something so beautiful about like the simplicity of the business model. You know what I mean? And that like some of the stuff that I'm like describing about Apple, like it's like so wonky. It's not wonky, but it's just hard to pull off. And like so many major things have to go right. You know what I mean? From like Foxconn in China, where the phones are made, to global supply chains, to regulatory concerns, to how many iPads can we put on a shipping cargo boat and send it from Foxconn to Los Angeles. Are we gonna get unfavorable legislation about, is Bobby Kennedy going to go after the production of, the gold that's in the iPhone because of how it's like treating people? I mean, or how the gold mining or whatever rare earth metals that are in the phone, like, are they, sourced in a safe way? Like, there's so many things that can like go wrong at that point in like the growth phase for them. Now it's a much more stable business, obviously, with cash flow all over the place. like I think AirPods by themselves, AirPods would be like a top 50 or at least a top 100 company in the world by itself, just AirPods. Now, of course, a lot of that is because of the brand loyalty that comes back to the mothership. But yeah, so right now, Apple's a much more stable company. But back then, at their at their growth phase for trying to get all this stuff to work, it was much more dicey, and so much stuff could have like went wrong that like I just don't see like going wrong at strategy, because there is no manufacturing, there is no raw material sourcing, there are no global supply chains, there is no, it's not like Tesla trying to like introduce to the world like fully functioning like humanoid robots, right? It's not this like, hey, it's this totally new novel like thing that we have to, really get like change customer behavior in order to, have success in this. No, it's much more cut and dry, boring in a good way. But it's a much more cut and dry thing because everyone understands like, getting interest, getting yield, whether it's in a CD, which I believe stands for checking deposit. Those CD type accounts, they'll be like 3, 4, 5, 6 months in duration at a bank. They'll give you 3 or 4%, or at the US 10-year, or TLT, or kind of those like, generic options for this type of fixed income instrument. Like everyone understands that. So I think it's a much easier sell than some of these other businesses and what they got going on there. So that's kind of the core thoughts on strategy. What I'm going to look to do once I get like my office set up and everything like that, I'm going to look to have start doing more like analytics, start like building more dashboards, start sharing that stuff. But yeah, other than that, if we don't have any more questions in the chat, I might let this pup go to bed. We might do some bite work if she's up for it. Do a little show on that. And I'm also down to talk about the dogs. I might do a show where like we just talk about the dogs if there's interest, if people have interest in like Malinois, Dutch Shepherds, German Shepherds, want to talk best practices or stuff like that. And maybe we'll make a podcast about it. We'll call it Quant Bros, where it's just, friends talking about a shared interest, like working line dogs. But yeah, we might do some cool demonstrations too over the weeks. I might have some people, break into the house, like friends with bite suits on, and see how she reacts to a simulated break-in. But she looks pretty tired over there. So I think we're just gonna go ahead and wrap it up here. I'll think more about demonstrations at the beginning of the show, but yeah, I'm happy I was able to get something out here. It's been too long. Like I said, I do miss this stuff. I do want to start bringing guests back on the show, start getting some fresh perspectives. And it's also just way easier to do a show when you can pass the mic and you're not trying to do an hour and a half just by yourself. But yeah, so more to come. Definitely on a very exciting journey here, and nothing has changed for me. You know what I mean? The conviction that I had at the top or at the bottom of last year is only grown since then. And this is not something that I think it would make sense for me to try and like get cute on, as Dan Hillary says, and try and like trade around the core position. I have no MicroStrategy options, and I have not in, almost a year now. And maybe outside of one small position in the beginning of the summer. But what I really just feel comfortable doing right now is just holding spot in size, just holding shares, not selling covered calls, not even thinking about selling covered calls. I just feel good just owning spot and size and just slowly increasing that number. Some days, most days, I don't even log into the brokerage accounts, especially recently. But the days that I do log in, if I have extra, dividend money that came in and the stock's down a little bit, I'm just buying more. And then logging out, closing the machine and going out and just like living life. And that's what I'm focused on right now, especially for the short term, especially as we get settled in our new journey here. But with that, thanks, friends. I know definitely was a rushed episode, kind of hodgepodgey, but hopefully we made the best of it, and we'll be back soon. What do you think about the fanny pack, the combat fanny pack here? It's where I keep the treats and everything. Later, friends. I'll see you around.